You're listening to The Lead Like No Other Podcast, episode 84. On today's episode, we're going to talk about leveraging stress and leadership and how the two things actually are very much intertwined. What I'm going to present you today is actually a workshop or a webinar that I've conducted a few times for some of my clients as well as some organizations out there on how do we leverage stress? How do we navigate stress? And we need to be able to do that. These are stressful times, there's no doubt about it, but our ability to understand physically, psychologically, and emotionally where stress comes from and how to identify it, and then what are the tools that we can use to really manage or navigate stress are going to be so important to us. I will tell you through my own experiences and through many of the episodes, if you've listened to the things that I've talked about in previous episodes, the challenges that we're going through now, how we come out of this on the other end will be a result of how we deal with this going into it. That there are things that can be positive that will come from this. And that's not to say that there aren't going to be struggles and challenges. I don't deny that. We're all dealing with those. But there is ability here to leverage the stress and challenges that we have. And when we do that, that really is about leadership, inspiring others. Our actions inspiring others will do that. So let's get into it. This is Patrick Barron. I'm here to present a very timely webinar on stress management. The title of it here is How to Effectively Navigate Stress in Uncertain Times, which certainly with things that are going on in your own communities around the world is certainly a time where we all need to understand how do we first recognize the origins of stress, the impact that stress has on us, but also the strategies for effectively addressing stress. And a lot of things that I'm going to talk about in today's webinar will be topics that I've discussed over the past 2 years on the podcast that I run. I also have a company called Emory Leadership Group, where I focus on leadership development, team development, and individual development, really around what I would term as leadership reimagined. It's how do we look at leadership in a much different way. And this stress management webinar that we're going to talk about today really is a leadership webinar. And the reason for that is our ability to navigate stress, either our own or to help others, really is inspiring. And it's about actions that inspire. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Some of my background, right? My master's is in organizational leadership. I established my business in 2008, which was at a time when there was a financial crisis. So certainly I'm familiar with stress in that regard. The focus of my work is really in a few different areas. One is emotional intelligence. One is personality, which I use DISC for that. And lastly is around influence and bias research. And a lot of the work that I do, especially on the influence side, is from work that I had been involved with in trainings through a gentleman named Dr. Robert Cialdini. So a quote that I will often use is by John Quincy Adams: if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And as I had mentioned, even though this is about stress management, it is a leadership webinar as well, because our actions and how we are able to navigate stress really has the ability to inspire those around us, whether they're employees or family members or friends or community members. We really do have the ability to impact on a very high level here. So the objectives of this webinar are a few things. One is to explore the biological, psychological, and social aspects of the human stress response. And I think I've underlined that obviously because this is a response. How we choose to deal with the stresses in our lives that's our response. And it impacts us physically, emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually, all of those. So we'll understand different coping strategies that can help us. And then lastly, we'll talk about a model that I created called POWER. And it's based on a lot of research that was done by a number of different researchers, one of them being a gentleman named Sean Aker out of Harvard University, who created what was called the 21-Day Happiness Challenge. And we'll talk about how those activities can really impact your ability to deal with stress. So when we talk about the origins of stress, first, many of us are familiar, obviously, with the CDC. If we weren't before, we certainly are now, the Center for Disease Control. And they have a definition of stress, which is harmful physical, and psychological responses when job requirements don't match capabilities, resources, or the needs of the worker. And certainly all of those, with many people having to work remotely today, are feeling those. And even if you're not working remotely, you're still feeling, especially if you're in retail places that are necessities right now, that there is a stress that comes with that. Am I going to catch the virus that's going around by being in that much contact with other individuals? What's important here to recognize is this is not to be confused with challenges, because we need challenges. Challenges can be very positive. They force us to move forward. And the goal, as I look at this, is, are there ways that we can take some of the things that we perceive as stresses and really create them and turn them into challenges? So the next is, how stressed are we? Well, the American Psychological Association survey, this was done in 2014, and it said stress in America, paying with our health. And you can Google this to get the full survey that was done, but it looked at 4 different areas. One was work, one was money, one was family, and one was health. And in all of those areas, right, we're dealing with all of those right now in terms of stress. This was a little over 3,000 individuals. And what they found was that 60% of those that were surveyed considered stress in work to be significant. And also 64% said financial stress was to be significant. Now, if you were to take that in 2020, I'm sure these numbers would be much higher. I think what's important to recognize here is that emotional support mattered. And we talk so much today about the importance or the need for social distancing. And while that might be good for our physical health, it is detrimental to every other type of health that we have: emotional, spiritual, and intellectual. And this is an example of that. When these individuals were surveyed, 43% without support said that their stress had increased over the year before. And also 43% said that they had experienced depression as a result of that lack of support. Whereas those that did have support, only 26% said that it had increased over the previous year, and 32% had experienced depression over the last year. Again, high numbers, but we can see that emotional support matters. So what are the causes of stress? I have down below causes of stress response, perceived lack of control. And oftentimes my own experience has been that really when we're talking about stress, stress is the result of a lack of control. Either if I'm stressed financially, it's because either I'm not making enough money or too much money is going out. If I'm stressed about work, that there's a piece of my job that I don't control. Either maybe it's I've got a manager that is really difficult right now, or I'm in a role that I don't feel like I've got control over my career. If we really pull this thing back, we can find that our stress, generally the root cause of it comes from a lack of control. So there are 2 kinds that we'll talk about. One is external causes, right? Family, work, economics, school, major life events, unforeseen events, and also isolation, right? We talk about social distancing being important right now, but also isolation that social distancing can be a very high reason for our level of stress. When we talk about internal causes, are the other cause for stress here: worry, fear, attitudes, unrealistic expectations. Maybe it's past experiences or histories that we've had. And when we look at signs and symptoms of stress, we can see right across the board, whether it's cognitive, behavioral, emotional, physiological, it impacts every aspect of those, right? Cognitive is decreased concentration and memory. Our ability, maybe even to do very rudimentary tasks, are impacted when we feel like we're in stressful situations. Behaviorally, right? It can increase irritability. It can cause withdrawal. It can cause violence. Emotionally, it can create fear, anxiety, depression, fatigue. And then physiologically, we know there are so many studies out there that talk about the negative impact that stress can have here, right? Increased blood pressure, increased heart rates, respirations, somatic sleeping issues, also decreased immune responses. And on the next slide here, we can see common stress-associated diseases. Now, this isn't to say that these diseases, the origin starts out primarily in stress. It's simply to say that stress has been identified as a component of each one of these that is listed here. Next, we talk about the effects of a wandering mind. And this was done by Harvard researchers Matt Killingsworth and Dan Gilbert, and it was published in Science of 2010. And the title of this was A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. And what they did was they sampled 2,250 adults, and it was done on their iPhones that randomly throughout the day they would get a text. And when they received that text, what they had to do was answer these three questions. How are you feeling right now? What are you doing right now? And are you thinking about something other than what you are currently doing? And what they found was that in almost 47% of the cases, there was mind wandering. More importantly, what they found was that people tended to be considerably less happy when their minds were wandering. And certainly right now, we are in one of those places that our minds can wander often if we don't have routines or structure in our day. There are many people that are now working from home in environments where there isn't structure. And this could be either I'm working with a group of people that are in our house together, or maybe it's I'm an individual. I live by myself, and this is creating a real problem for me as well, to be able to set up a routine or structure. And this really can have very damaging effects on us, because what do we tend to do is if we don't have structure, our mind can easily wander. So when we think about this in terms of thinking traps, I'm listing just three here. One is this idea of the victim, right? Other people or circumstances are the sole cause of my setbacks or problems, right? We look to other people to blame our current condition on what happened somewhere else. And we each one of these, we can go down a very dark road. So the next one is catastrophizing, which is around ruminating about irrational worst case outcomes of a situation. So we're in that right now where many people can look and say, it seems like all the news is about how many people are dying, without really looking in terms of saying, not that it's not a serious situation we're in, but that the great majority of individuals will get well. And even financially or whatever other struggle that we're dealing with, that eventually we will come out of this, right? So the next one is helplessness. Negative events are going to impact all areas of your life and you have no control. So back to this lack of control in terms of stress. Now, if we were to go back to that previous slide around a wandering mind, we can think, if I have too much time to think about these things, it really can get very unhealthy. So we'll look at this from two different approaches in terms of positive coping, which to me is around responding, and negative coaching, or coping, which is around reacting. And the positive, right, helps us to be able to resolve stress or become resilient. And the negative coping, even though it might feel good in the moment, in the long term, it actually is more damaging to us. And we'll explore both of those. So first, activities that promote positive coping. One is realistic expectations. Set realistic goals or expectations for your day. Remain positive while planning for challenges. And I have here Sully in US Air. If people remember, Sully from US Air puts his plane down in the Hudson River, and people ask him, how could you do that? And he said, well, it was just something that we planned for, right? He had practiced that many, many times, not necessarily landing in the Hudson, but similar type of situations. So even though the expectation is for a positive situation, it's preparing for, what am I going to do if things get really stressful, and how am I going to deal with this? Setting realistic expectations may involve, right, I have to work from home for a full day today, knowing that this is not going to be like when I'm in the office. I need to give myself some cushion here to understand that this will not look the same as when I'm in an office. Now, next is about routine. Maintain a schedule. I think it's so important in terms of keeping a schedule. Get dressed, take a shower, wear the clothes that you would normally wear if you go out to work. And then lastly, I've got listed here, limit news streaming. Pick only certain times in the day that maybe you'll check the news. Maybe it's just for 10 minutes in the morning, and maybe it's 10 minutes at the end of the day. Do not leave a TV on streaming, because when we do that, all it's doing is feeding negative information. We don't need to know what's going on every minute of every hour on the news, because I guarantee you there aren't going to be many positive stories that are going to be uplifting. It's simply going to put you into a downward spiral. The next is around reframing. Change the way we look at things. How will I get stronger from this? Ask yourself better questions. Journaling can be a really powerful one in terms of um, helping us to process information, writing them down, but also on a positive note. The next one here is around nutrition and hydration. This was one that was given to me by one of the fitness trainers that I had interviewed on my podcast. And he talked about generally we don't get enough water. And his calculation that he used was to say that we should multiply our body weight by 0.6. That will give us the number of ounces. So if I weigh 200 pounds, then what that's going to equate to is about 120 ounces of water that I need to drink in a day. So almost a gallon. The importance of that is that when we're bored or we don't have structure, do we look to eating? And I know I'm guilty of that, and I've seen it in our household, that we eat because it's there. It's something to do. Well, if we're drinking more water, it fills up our stomach and makes us less hungry as well. Secondly, here is limit the number of processed foods. Try and have fresh fruits or vegetables or small things that you can snack on if you're going to. The next is around relaxation, right? Learn relaxation techniques. Take time out. There are so many different apps out there for mindfulness that are important. And I've got here that says, find your happy place. And what I mean by that is part of your routine or part of your day. I know it can be difficult for many of us, but find a place in your house that is not about work. Try and isolate what you do for work and that routine to a certain part of the house or apartment or wherever you live, because what's important is if I want to sit on the couch where the television set or where the living room is, then I want that time to be about relaxation. And I don't want my mind to confuse the two of I work in this space, which is stressful, and now I come to relax in what has become equated with me to a place of stress. And lastly, I have here discuss the problem, right? Utilize existing social supports to problem solve. Talk to people, whether it's FaceTime or Zoom or Skype or social distance walking, whatever it might be, find time in your day. And I don't care how much of an introvert you are, that we need each other. Isolation is damaging to us. Find regular check-in times that we can have with people to be able to address this. The next part is about avoiding negative coping. And these are sort of the reactionary ways that we cope. Avoiding, withdrawal. And we run that risk when we talk about social distancing. If we're afraid to be around other people, this works against us on every other aspect of our health. Negative attitudes, right? Especially if you're in a house with other people, right? That it creates a contagion that my negative attitude, and we know through research, will bleed out to other people, and that will create negative attitudes in them. And before we know it, we've in a sense, we're not flattening the curve in our own house as it relates to negative attitudes. Anger outbursts, right? They feel good in the moment. They don't work well long-term. Alcohol, drugs, they act as depressants. Negative self-talk, right? It's never going to get better when we fall into that trap, right? This is part of that wandering mind. Resentment, it's somebody else's fault that I'm in this situation. And then lastly is violence, right? That coping mechanism becomes to such an extreme that we lash out at people violently. So when we look at coping and resilience, we can think of this in two different ways. To me, the coping is the day-to-day ability to control emotions, ability to perceive reality, ability to think rationally, and the ability to problem solve. So those are our day-to-days. Well, I might be able to problem solve for 3 days in a row or think rationally, and then all of a sudden it becomes too much for me. And on day 4, I can't do this anymore. This is where resilience takes over. This is the long-term ability for us to bounce back, positive coping capacity to deal with this. And then this, what does it do? It provides resistance to negative events. The more resilient we can be and the more we can train for this, which we can, the more we're able to deal with this long term. And when we look at this, I have here resourcefulness. We can think of two different things, resources and resourcefulness. We are always going to lack resources. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I don't have the right space. Whatever it might be, I'm too tall, I'm too short, I don't have enough hair, I've got too much hair. I don't care what it is. We will all lack resources. What we all have the equal ability to leverage is resourcefulness. And that is around, how am I going to deal with this? If I don't have enough money, what can I do? What things can I control? That's really where we need to come back to. And that's the resourcefulness piece of it. And we all have equal ability to resourcefulness. Nobody can take that away from us except for ourselves. So when we look at what are some of the resilience builders, I've got some listed here, right? Positive role models, humor, optimism and expectancy, religion and spirituality, social support, the thought record, and lastly, what I'll talk about in a little more detail is the power journal. So when we talk about positive role models, why is that important? Well, first, they create, just as we talked about a negative contagion, positive role models create a positive contagion through their attitudes. Maybe they're optimists, right? We're around people that are uplifting. And this doesn't mean that somebody's a Pollyanna or they never look at the downside, but they're people that generally are able to sort of roll through resistance. Those are people we want to try and attach ourselves to in many ways. People that have high values or have values that are important right now, empathy, generosity, competitive here, right? People that are saying, I'm going to find a way through this, right? I'm not going to let this thing dictate my life, that I will find a way through this. You want to be around those people because they can be inspiring. Skills, people that are good at problem solving, right? There might be people that are out there that are good to bounce questions off, challenges that you're dealing with. How would they deal with this? Lastly, behaviors, right? I want to sort of surround myself with people that are good listeners, people that are encouraging in terms of their behaviors, how important that is. Next is around optimism and expectancy, right? Positive beliefs. There's a cognitive reframing that we'll talk about called the thought record, and our ability to believe that there's a meaningful cause, right? What we're going through right now, there's something that will be positive that will come from this. I think that's really important. This is not to say that you're a Pollyanna, because as you can see here, the green X or the green triangle with the X in it really speaks to the other aspect of this, which I think we need to balance, right? It's important to acknowledge relevant negative factors. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this, I believe this is a leadership webinar, that if you have people that report to you, you have family members, you have friends around you, I think our ability to say, I'm struggling, I'm scared, I'm sad, our ability to put ourselves in places that we create ourselves intentionally, vulnerability or vulnerable spaces, I think is really important. Now, with that said, if I'm a leader or if I'm following somebody that's leading our group, that's not to say that I want that person every day coming in saying, I'm struggling again today, I'm scared again today, I don't know where we're going today. That's not it. That's not leadership. What I do want is, I want that person to be able to admit when things are a struggle, because we know through work that I do is that people trust people that are real and are transparent. Nobody has the answers all the time. And if I'm able to say that, like, I'm kind of struggling right now, I don't have an answer for this, it provides more trust in somebody else. It doesn't negate my ability to lead. It's about being real, because that person probably knows that, yeah, I might say I don't know where we're going, but I don't give up on that. I will find a way through this. That's what I'm working toward. There's a huge difference there. But we need to be able to say when we're struggling. If you have kids, they need to see it, because it gives them the ability to be able to be more open about how they're feeling. If we stuff it inside the whole time and do the I'm the leader, or nothing bothers me, you will lose trust in individuals, because they won't feel as though when they're really struggling, they can come to you. And that's a fact. So humor is next. Certainly so important here, right? And there's so much research around the many different areas that humor helps us when it's about stress or physical healing or emotional healing. And there are so many different ways we can do it, right? Movies, books, jokes, gifts or GIFs, as I love to call them and drive my kids nuts. Those can be so important, right? And we need to be able to laugh at ourselves and situations because it helps us to get through them. So however you need to do that, find a way to have humor inserted into what you're doing, into your daily activities. Next is around religion and spirituality, and this is not specific to any one religion or spirituality. It's simply to say that we know through research there is a strong impact here. Right? It's associated with both psychological and physical well-being. Guards against despair. To me, this is where faith and hope come into play. That I once heard somebody say that if you feed your faith, your fears will starve. And I certainly in my own life would agree with that. I've experienced that myself. It provides social support, and we'll talk about this in a little bit around belongingness. It also provides positive role models. And lastly, it provides a positive mission. This is about being for others, and never do we need the idea of being for others more than we need it right now. Next, we'll talk about it from a standpoint of social support. And there's so much out there in regards to belongingness research. Social support has a profound effect on life expectancy. We know that isolation and poor social support are associated with poor stress response. They create more despair. As I mentioned earlier, patients have better outcomes with a strong social network. And lastly, here I've got few hardy individuals go it alone and eventually will perish. And I truly believe that. We can't do this on our own. We are pack animals. And the research backs this up, that if 10,000 years ago you were voted outside of a tribe, that was a death sentence. You couldn't do it on your own. And I would argue that the same thing happens today when we're isolated from groups or each other, that there's a different death that we might die, but it is still a death. And I have lastly, a lot of my work is around this idea of self-made. There is no such thing as self-made. It's a myth. You cannot be self-made, because self-made would mean that I make the roads that I drive on, I make the car that I drive in, I make the computer that I use, I created the lights that I work under, the roof that's over my head. We need other people. We need each other. Now, that said, what we can be is self-motivated, and that's a difference. And we all have that ability. None of us are self-made. I think that's more damaging than it's helpful. So rather than think of it as self-made, think of it as self-motivating. That's what we can be. The next is around cognitive behavioral therapy. And I've just brought in one component to this, which is called the thought record exercise. This is about how do we take a situation that might be catastrophizing and turn it into a rational response. This is about challenging our thoughts in helpful, realistic, and balanced ways. So take whatever that thought is that you might have, and then say, what's the evidence that this automatic thought is true or untrue? And I would argue, do it for both. Next, what's the worst, best, and most realistic thing that could happen? Because that helps us to sort of understand what's the best case, what's the worst case, and really what's the reality of this. Next is, can I live through this? I think as dire as things seem, you can live through this. The majority of people will live through this. What's the bigger picture? Next, am I thinking in all or nothing terms? Next, what can I do to solve the problem? How can I help myself deal with this? And we'll talk about one exercise that I think might help in terms of setting up an inventory. Next is, what's difference will this make in 2 weeks or 10 years? And you can change the days there. You can say in 4 weeks, in 2 months, in 5 years, whatever that might be, but just challenge yourself that way. Next is the power journal that I'm going to talk about. And the power journal really is based on, again, a lot of different research around both happiness and well-being. One of the things that I'm going to focus here on is a model that I put together called POWER, which is an acronym. And it talks about 5 different behaviors that if we can implement these on a daily basis, we know the research has demonstrated that these 5 types of activities create more happiness and well-being in our lives. And the first one is around praise. If you can start your day out in the morning thinking of 3 different things that you're grateful for. And although this is very limited here, the power journal that I've created, and you can see the picture there on the right, is available to anybody for free. There's no call to action after this. You won't be asked to buy anything or join any other groups. It's a 10-page journal that I had developed to help many of my clients be able to, on a more regular basis, build their own resistance. So again, praise, the first one, is about gratitude. What are 3 things you can be grateful for? And I would challenge you to think of 3 things differently each day. And also, I would ask you to think about the challenges that you're faced with and find a way to be grateful for those. That this challenge that I'm currently faced with, I'm grateful for because what it's going to do is it's going to create this event in me, or it's going to build up this skill in me because of this challenge. The next is around others. How can I make an impact for somebody else today? And again, we're so challenged right now with social distancing. This is so important. And from a leadership perspective, right, it's about being for others. How can we do something for somebody else? You might know of people that are working from home, but they also live by themselves. And that can be an immense struggle and burden on individuals. And to find ways to reach out to those people around you just to see how are they doing? What do they need? Maybe setting up a FaceTime with them to be able to talk to them to see how they're doing. But we need that, right? And what that creates inside of us when we do for others is it increases our own feeling of self-worth. That's where a lot of this research comes from. Next is around writing. I had mentioned earlier around journaling. This is in the research that was done, people only had to write for 2 minutes a day. And generally what you do is at the end of the day, write 2 to 3 sentences of what went well for the day. Because what you do, if you think about starting out your day being grateful for 3 different things, and you end your day in a place of what are you grateful for the day, and you have to force yourself maybe at times to think about what did go well today, you know, and for the littlest things, you know what, maybe we didn't have an argument in the house today, or maybe everybody worked together today, whatever that might be. Force yourself to write 2 to 3 sentences about what went well for the day. And the reason for that is that we bookend our day. We start out in a positive place and we end in a positive place. And oftentimes, I think the way we are wired is if we're going to bed, we think about either what we didn't get done today or we dread what's coming tomorrow. And if we think about this from a standpoint of going to sleep and the importance of restorative sleep, it works against us if we go to bed in a negative state. We probably don't sleep as well, which impacts our ability to create restorative sleep. Next is around exercise. A lot of the research that was done was in the study that was done by Sean Aker, they only had to do 10 minutes of exercise each day. That's a walk around the block, whatever it might be, but just getting that physical time. We need that. Now, some of the research that I use is around studies that were done with patients that had been diagnosed with major depressive episodes. And what they found was in some of these studies, and I've got them referenced in the journal itself, as little as 30 minutes a day, 3 days a week. And what they found was patients that had had major depressive episodes that were clinically diagnosed, that after 10 months, and that's not 10 months of exercise, but after 10 months of this study, they tended to present better than those patients that were on either an antidepressant or were on antidepressant and exercise at the same time. Exercise by itself in several of these studies proved to be best. Now, that's not to say that if you're on an antidepressant that you stop it and just start working out 3 days a week for 30 minutes, but it's simply to suggest that there is an enormous amount of research in regards to the importance that exercise has. And there are multiple ways that we can exercise. It's not all about running or cycling. There are definitely many ways that we can do this, and you need to find what works for you. Lastly is around relaxation, and this is 2 minutes of quiet time. This could be just for 2 minutes, practicing your breathing, or square breathing, 4 seconds in, hold, 4 seconds out, and then you repeat. Just doing that for 2 minutes has been proven to reduce stress and anxiety in individuals. And again, these 5 things that I've talked about here, these activities, I've turned it into an acronym called POWER. So praise is around gratitude, others is around doing stuff for other people, writing is about journaling, E is for exercise, and R is for relaxation. And this is mirrored off of a lot of work that was done, again, through a number of different researchers, but also through a study that Sean Aker did called the 21-Day Happiness Challenge. Now, as part of the journal that I've created, at the end of this is what is a tracker here. So basically, you have a 3-month tracker where on a daily basis, you just check off, what did I do? Did I do my praise for today? Did I do something for somebody else? Did I write today? Did I get my exercise today? And did I find a time to relax? Those things are so important. And again, it's part routine, but these are the most impactful activities that have been proven to help both our well-being and our happiness. And again, if you look at the bottom here, to get the complete power journal, if you go to emeryleadershipgroup.com, that's where you can basically go on and get that free PDF digital copy of it. Next, we'll talk about this last learning exercise. What you want to do is take any source of stress that you might have and conduct an inventory of coping strategies that you use now or have used in the past. And also, as you can see here, I've noted, include the negative strategies as well. List your strengths and factors that may enhance your resilience. So we're really taking an inventory here. And then on step 4 of this, while you're considering these, develop a personalized stress management plan to enhance both your coping and resilience. To me, this is, if you remember, we talked earlier in this about Sully from US Air. This to me is like the Sully US Air learning exercise, that what I'm doing is I'm looking at the areas that I know are going to create stress for me throughout the day. These are the things that generally create stress where I am. And here's a plan that I'm going to follow that's going to help me address these. And when we do that, we're going to be in a better place. Now, before I move on to just closing this out, I want to mention one thing here, which is around the Jackpine Pinecone and how this can inspire us. As it's noted here, the seeds in the Jackpine Pinecone, they don't release until they've experienced either extreme heat on their own, which would be very high heat, or it's generally a forest fire. But once that occurs, the seed that is in this pine cone is able to be released because the resin, it gets so hot that the resin melts away and opens up, or it liquefies. And I believe that many today are experiencing what feels like a catastrophic fire. But if we really think of it in this way, that there are many opportunities and chances for us to be opened up in ways that we never would have been opened up if it wasn't for the situation that we're in. And I would challenge you to think about it this way, that you look at it in terms of what opportunities are going to open up for me because of this. And it's ones that you will create. They won't show up without you exploring and looking for this, but I think we need to do that. So if we review this, stress it's a part of everyday life, right? It's a perceived lack of control, and it can promote growth and competency. If unrelenting and overwhelming, it can cause adverse effects. And negative coping causes additional problems. When we look at this in terms of positive coping, what does it do? It increases our resilience while diminishing the adverse effects of stress. It promotes physical, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual health. And what I've done throughout this is provide a number of different strategies, activities that you can take. We are all different. What is going to work for one person isn't going to work for somebody else, but there is something here for everybody, and it is all based on research. And when we look at the end of this slide, when we review these, set realistic goals, exercise regularly, eat healthy, get adequate sleep, maintain a work-leisure balance, create positive reframing and optimism, enhance your social support, and practice using this power journal. And there are a number of different resources that will be available, that will be posted as well, that will deal with everything from building resistance to diet to exercise, positive thinking, stress management, activities that you can undertake from a variety of different sources. So with that said, we are all in this together. This is about being for others. And going back to the initial quote from John Quincy Adams, if your actions inspire somebody to do more, dream more, learn more, or become more, you're a leader. There's nothing in there about a title. That our ability to navigate stress and to help others to navigate their stress, those are actions that will be inspiring. And we all have that ability, and I believe responsibility to do that. And I wish all of you the best as you take this challenge on. I hope you found this episode beneficial to wherever you are. If you know somebody you think might be able to benefit from this as well, I'd ask that you forward it on to them. And I'm going to ask that if you haven't subscribed yet, that you do that. And it would mean certainly the world to me, and it would help me to continue to get this message out there, is if you found this valuable, if you leave a rating or a comment in terms of this or any other episode. Because to me, this is about two things. One is leading like no other, and it's also helping us all to realize that we all have the ability to rise above our best. And when we do that, and when we're there for each other, we will leverage the stress and the situation that we're under, and we'll be better because of it. And until our next episode, I wish you all the best and peace.